Well, welcome back, everyone. So this is session two of our Beyond the Studio compilations that we're going to be putting together, and we appreciate all of the suggestions from last week because we added a few to this week. We are going to get into a little more advanced stuff this week, but thank everyone for coming last week and those of you that are returning this week. So again, this is just a free little session that we're putting on just for employees. This will be recorded so you can share it with your people later. If you go to the chat, I have a link to the Beyond the Studio site page, so you can pull up the first recording from last week if you need to share that with anybody. The link is in there, all right? But welcome back. So today we're going to start out with outside photography with your cell phone and then paying attention to your background. So without further ado, Joey, you want to take it away and share your screen?
Here's another awesome scene. We're walking along and we see this spectacular redbud tree in bloom, and we want to get a picture of Aaron in front of this. I mean, this type of blooming tree only lasts a few days. Let's get a great shot here, Aaron. Oh man, that was really nice. But wait a minute. I think we forgot to notice what's going on in our background. We have a garbage dump and some boxes there, and the flower, the tree was so beautiful I didn't even notice. Let's try to make some improvement here. What if I see we have a shadowy area over here, and the shadowed areas are going to give us a much prettier light. Let's take a walk over there and see if we can improve both the lighting and our background at the same time. Now that we are in the shade, look at this excellent lighting. We have much better lighting. We don't have that harsh sunlight, and we can still see our flowering tree. What if I get a portrait like this of Aaron? Aaron, I'm going to have you there we go. I like that. Very nice. We got a good smile. This is really pretty nice. But wait a minute. There's some things on the ground there that don't necessarily look great. What if I come up a little bit closer with my camera and adjust my camera angle? Now I don't have those things in the picture that I didn't want. That's really a nice way to do it. I still have the flowering tree in the background, and I have a nice look. I'm going to come in for even a little more of a close-up. But let's say I want to get that wooden fence out of the way a little bit. Take a step away from there, Aaron, just a little bit. There we go. Now maybe that won't be quite as prominent in the picture. I like that. Very nice. I'm going to go back a little bit for a 3/4 length. Nice job, Aaron.
All right. So great little samples. I know Steve saw all that stuff before he went over there. He was just, he was playing us a little bit there, but obviously that placement, all right, and paying attention to your background is pretty critical. And even paying attention to your light. Like, it goes back to last week when we were discussing the fundamentals of light and the best place to put people. But you notice he had to kind of take multiple shots, and not all of them were perfect. That there's no such thing as perfect, right? But the main thing I wanted you to kind of see in that is that there can be more than one right answer for every picture we take. And he kept searching for those answers, right? And they kept coming. Not all of them were perfect, especially the first ones, but I want you guys to realize that it's not that Steve or Aaron or I or any of us know right away, well, what's the picture supposed to be, right? Sometimes we have to look for those answers. And with our phone, it's not a big deal. We're just recomposing and moving around. And we're going to be discussing a lot of that today. But I think that's the one thing you want to take away from all of our cell phone photography is, oh, someone wants to join. Got him. So that's one thing you want to take away from our cell phone photography is search for that next right answer, because they will keep coming when you keep looking. You can't just say, oh, there's my answer, I'm done, right? And move on. There is always going to be another right answer, okay? So any questions on that? Anything anyone wants to add?
I was just going to say, I guess the moral of the story with that little video is learn to really see everything that the camera sees. So often we get kind of really interested in working with our subject, especially if, maybe you're out photographing your kids or your grandkids and you're all excited and you just don't notice the things that are there, but the camera still sees them. So learn to see everything that the camera sees so that you can make choices about it ahead of time. And especially now in the sort of the day where we've got these apps on our phone where you can circle something in the background and it'll make it go away for you. I think it's better to make it go away before you take the picture. Get it right first rather than having to edit it later.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that, Steve. It's, like Frank said, take several, move around, try different angles, try different things. But it's always better to try to get it right in the camera than it is to try to fix it afterwards. It's much easier to do. One of my mentors in this company would say, shoot it right and it'll be right. So, I keep that in my mind whenever I'm out photographing. Does anybody else want to discuss that, or are we ready to move on? Because I've got the next video that's actually going to take this a little step further.
Go take it away.
All right. Take it away. So along with, trying different things and trying different angles, one of the things you saw Steve doing was moving me away from the background and changing the relationship between the subject and the background. So let's watch this next video and discuss that.
Placing your subject to make the image look more interesting or more pleasing is an important thing to think about. So here I am sitting on the couch, and I can sit lots of different ways on a couch, but they're going to be, different poses and ways that we use the orientation of the camera to make it look more interesting. So let's look at what it looks like. If I were just to plop down on my couch watching my favorite shows, sitting directly forward like this maybe isn't the best look for a picture. So instead of just plopping down on the couch for a picture, let's look at some different ways to make this image look better. Well, first and foremost, it's a matter of how we place our subject and how we pose our subject. This really straightforward look is just very blah, not a lot is happening here. It's not very dimensional and it's just kind of lackluster. So let's change it up. If I turn my body just a little bit, and actually if I refrain from sitting back on the couch, you see how I sit back on the couch and I look like a little more lazy? If I just sit up a little bit, here I am still sitting on the couch, but this is a nicer pose than it would be if I were just leaning back and sitting straight. So we want to maybe think about things like that. Would sitting up straight look a little better? And just do something like this. Let's take a picture of this and see what it looks like. Something else to consider in this situation, I've got this nice long couch. Would I rather have a picture taken in a horizontal orientation, a landscape orientation, to really utilize the whole look of the image? So in a situation like this, I'd want my subject to use up the space. So in that case, I may even scoot over just a little bit and lean over a little bit and take up a little more room on the couch. And that way, maybe if I were doing this, a vertical image wouldn't make sense. In this situation, a horizontal image would make sense. So let's maybe take this picture. So using the whole couch, the whole scene is a great thing. Maybe we can improve upon that just a little bit more. Let's go ahead and adjust our blinds to allow a little more light into the situation. So Steve's going to come on over here and adjust our blinds. And the whole time that he's doing this, where is he looking? He's looking at his subject and he's looking at how the light affects the subject and making these decisions. He's thinking about those qualities of light. And so Steve has adjusted the light and adjusted the angle of the camera. So now, as you see, he's knelt down to get a little lower angle. So let's go ahead and change it one more time. So we have this nice horizontal image that we took. We've also got our vertical portrait image. But I wonder if we could even take this even farther by changing the complete angle of where the camera's at and the light to the subject. So in this moment, we're going to spin around and see what it looks like coming from a different angle. I don't necessarily have to have the picture taken from the front of the couch. Maybe I can take it from the side of the couch. All right, so now we have changed the direction and the angle of the camera, but what we have also done is we've changed the lighting in the room. So we went ahead and we closed the blinds down on the side that we were using earlier, and we've opened up the blinds on the other window. This other window was giving us some really bright light, but since it's so far away, it's actually nice and diffused on my face because it's bouncing all over the room and giving some nice diffused light. So here I am, we're gonna be utilizing this couch in a different way. Instead of straight on, we're gonna come from the side of the couch. So we can take this image in a couple different ways. We can take a horizontal landscape image, or we can take a vertical portrait image. So I'm gonna go ahead and set up, since the camera is in a landscape orientation, I'm going to utilize the space of this image with my arm over here. And then Steve's going to take a picture. Now, if we turn that camera orientation to portrait, to vertical, well, maybe I bring my hand over here to kind of shorten up the pose a little bit. To maybe make a little more sense in a portrait orientation. We can take this image just a step further. Remember, on your cell phones, a lot of them have that portrait mode. Now, beware, I'm talking about portrait orientation and portrait mode. There are two different things. Portrait mode is the mode inside the camera that makes the background look nice and hazy. And that way you can focus on the face and that you don't have that distracting background. So Steve's going to set portrait mode on his camera. We're going to see what that looks like.
A little more this way.
So in that image, what you see is a really nice subject with a nice blurry background. And we even have this beautiful lamp in the background to give us just a little extra point of interest.
All right, so there we go, changing the pose as far as, in relationship to the camera and the lens. Makes a difference. You don't have to just do the normal stand there and smile. We always like to talk about how if you have two of anything, you need to do different things with it. And if it bends, like elbows bend and knees bend and our neck bends, if things bend it. It makes the pose more dynamic and more interesting. Isn't that right, Frank? You taught me that one.
It is. Yeah. Twos of anything, put them on different planes. And that way you do add some more dynamic tension and just it's a more pleasing image. If everything is straight and symmetrical, then the person has to be perfectly symmetrical, and none of us really are, right? So it sort of hides any imperfections when you're moving them around. And I love how you just change the little things and flow pose to different angles and different lighting. And guess what? You have all these different answers, right? Again, more than one right answer. So super cool.
Just one general thing really quick. If you want to summarize one idea, turn your subject a little bit to the side. Always have the body a little bit to the side. Keep the face toward the main light where the light is coming from, whichever window it's coming from, and it makes things more dynamic. I think the human body always looks better at angles. Really, the only time, when would you want to photograph somebody straight onto the camera? I can only think of a couple instances. If I was photographing a football player or a rugby player or a hockey player, I would want them to look as huge as possible. So I'm going to face them straight at the camera. But in all other instances, turn a little to the side, tilt things a little bit, and then you've got a much better look.
I thought it was really cool too in the video. The progression is that as you made a little change here and there, and then it ended up at that last image, you know, and then portrait mode and the posing and the light from the window. In my opinion, that was, you know, the best image by far. And it was a step at a time that you got to that last image. So it's pretty cool watching the progression.
All right. Anyone else want to pipe in or any questions on what they did? All right. Okay. I think we can move on then. Want to jump into the next?
So our next video, we're going to go back outside, and the big topic here on this video is thinking in terms of, you know, you've got your subject in a scene, in a location, and there's a background. Sometimes maybe there's a foreground, but you have them in a place and you're photographing the person in the place. You got to kind of ask yourself, which is more important, the person or the place? And what is the relationship between the two, and how you can make some changes to better emphasize your subject.
All right, we just found this really cool piece of street art, and I want to get a picture of Aaron in front of this. It's really awesome. I may think when I have Aaron up close to it like this, that this is the best way to use it, but guess what? I can't really see the whole piece of street art like this. If I take Aaron's picture like this, give me a nice smile, Aaron, there we go. I can't see the whole background. So I might think, Aaron, stay there. I'm going to back up a little bit, and I might back up like this. And this looks pretty cool. Now I can see the whole piece of street art, the whole background. I'm going to get a picture there. But what if I had Aaron come closer to me? I can still get a great shot of this background, but let me pull my subject closer to the camera. Aaron, just walk straight toward me. A little bit closer. Right there is good. This way, a little bit for me. Okay. Now what do we have? My subject is closer to the camera, bigger in the scene, actually because I'm photographing my subject, not the background. I want the background to serve the picture, not the other way around. So now I've got my subject positioned the way I want, and I can still see the whole background. So give me another nice smile. There we go. This is great. Bring up our shadow exposure a little bit, and now a good smile. Awesome. There we go.
So again, I think that just the idea there that if you move the subject in relationship to the background, in this case, we move the subject closer to the camera, further from the background, and that allowed us to get an appropriate crop on our subject. And at the same time, we were able to see the whole background. I've seen a lot of people make the mistake of they've got something in the background they want to photograph, and they do one of two things. They'll either put the person right against the background, in which case you can't see the background, or they'll put the person right up against the background and they'll back way up so they can see this whole thing they want to see. And now their subject is really tiny in the picture. And let's face it, we've all made both of those mistakes probably at one point in the past, right? Especially when it's a cell phone thing. We whip it out and we're really quick going to do something and we'll make that mistake. But this is just take a minute and think it through and say, okay, where do I need to be to get, if your objective is to get that whole background in, figure out where you need to stand for that, and then put the subject in the right position within that so you also make the subject look good. Very simple stuff. Just learn to see what the camera sees, because camera's going to see it when you take the picture. You can't hide it from the camera, right? So you need to use your positioning to your best efforts there. So that's good. Frank used the term here, forced perspective. When you're purposely manipulating the scene to make the background look a certain way, In that case, the background, you know, I think the background there was 20 feet or so tall, and Aaron isn't 20 feet tall. But in our final picture, we were able to see Aaron well and the background well. And that was all just a matter of where we put everything. So anybody
Steve,
have questions or?
yeah, I wonder if, oh, good, Alyssa, I was gonna, maybe this will kind of tie in, pardon me for a moment. So I wonder how many people who are photographers here on this call have tried to do something like this. For instance, maybe taking a picture of a sports player in front of a scoreboard or something like that,
Yeah.
and try, or a big logo on a wall. In a situation like this, you know, you want to get that thing in there, but what actually works best is moving that subject farther away, which makes that thing smaller in the background and easier to use as a background item rather than, you know, cutting it off or, you know, making it look awkward. So sorry, Alyssa, go ahead.
That's okay. Thank you for that. I'm sure I saw Clayton raise his hand too, and he's probably going to laugh at me because he knows way more about camera lenses than I do. But I've been playing with on my iPhone, and I saw on the phone on that video too, there's a way to make your camera lens wider. And on a big background like that, I was watching that video and like hoping that Steve was going to click that button. You can make the camera angle like wider, and I feel like those wings would have looked really cool with that option too. So I challenge anybody who has a really big, beautiful background that they're trying to photograph to pinch that camera angle to be a little bit wider. It's really cool, that setting on the iPhone. I just wanted to add that in. And
Thank
Finn
you.
wanted to add that in too.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Something to consider, Alyssa, when you do something like that is be careful what it does to the dimensions of your subject. Because wide camera angles are great for adding in, you know, extra things in the background, but sometimes aren't great for the human body. So you have to be aware of what it's doing to your body proportions. And again, all choices, it's just a matter of where you put that subject in relationship to the background when using a wide angle lens. You just have to be careful where you put that person so you don't distort the actual person. But I like the idea.
The other thing that happens in use of different focal lengths, and we actually have a video coming up later today, but the wider angle of a lens makes whatever's in the background look smaller. Conversely, a more of a telephoto view makes whatever's in the background look larger. So you may have seen a picture one time or another of a sunset or the moon in the background of a person, and it looks humongous. Well, that's a really long telephoto lens does that. So you could use that here, but I think sometimes it's just a matter of stepping back. You know, simplicity is often the better choice.
Clayton, you had your hand raised. Would you like to go ahead?
Oh yeah, I just I ran into a similar situation as the one Steve was in that video. My mom and I were in downtown St. Charles, and they have this mural on the wall, on one of the brick walls, and it has I can't remember, I think it's wings or something like that, and she wanted a picture in front of it. So I'm like, oh, here I am with my camera, and I'm like, wait a second, this something's not right, because I had like a 50 millimeter lens, and I was like standing there, and to get it I ended up just using her cell phone because it was just a lot simpler and easier. And you know, I think this whole thing is a good idea because the cell phone is a viable option. I mean, there's plenty of ways it is a tool where you can use as a photographer to you know, it fits into a space. And I think in this scenario that I'm referencing, I mean, it worked better. So I don't know. I just wanted
agree.
to share
I think that cell phones are a viable option for sure. But more importantly, what we really want to be here for you guys is to help you learn why that tool is working better than the other tool, that 50 millimeter lens you had in your hands. Because when you understand the reasons why that cell phone's working better than that 50 millimeters, maybe you can start using those rules and those ideas to make that
Right.
camera work better than your phone.
Right.
So hopefully we're helping in that sort of a way.
Yeah, for sure. And that's it. Like, which tool is going to be better? Well, it depends on what you're doing, right? And yeah, that cell phone sure is convenient. Pull it out of your pocket and grab it.
Yeah,
But,
yeah.
but consistency wise, it's going to give you something different every time you take a picture. Where our cameras, we can lock down and we can put everything right where we need it to be and keep it that way for a whole school day, right? And capture everyone and make them all look the same. But the beauty of this is that you guys just get to be creative and jump in and out of things and use this tool in a different way. But any other comments or questions? Okay, I think we're moving into Joey, and you want to take it away, Joey?
Sure. You know, it's cool listening to the discussion because photography, like other art forms, it's a mixture of a trade, you know, a craft with art, with being creative. And when you merge those two things together, then you improve your craft. You know, you become more of a professional, if you want to call it that. And so this next video is kind of along those lines. It shows some tricks, I call them tricks, that can draw the viewer into the photo, that can kind of capture their interest. And one of those tricks is that the subject doesn't always have to be looking right into the camera. Sometimes you can have the subject looking off camera, and also about the rule of thirds, where you place the subject in the frame. So I'm going to share this.
Something else to consider. Your subject doesn't necessarily have to look directly into the camera for every single image. Sometimes you want to create a mood, a look, an intention of what that picture should look like. Maybe I want my subject to look like they are contemplating or looking off to something else. That direction of the eye might be very interesting in my photo. So instead of looking at the camera this time, I'm going to look out the window just a little bit. So as Steve comes in, I'm going to get all set. So we just took a beautiful image, but something that we haven't discussed yet is the orientation of the photo. Do we want the camera to be in a vertical orientation or a horizontal orientation? Another way to discuss that is, do we want the camera in a portrait orientation, up and down, or a landscape orientation, side to side? We want to utilize the orientation of our camera to positively affect our image. We've taken most of our photos in a portrait orientation, which means that they have been up and down. But in a situation like this, especially when I have my subject looking and directing their eye gaze off into a faraway point, it might make more sense to turn that camera to a landscape orientation. What that does is it gives the eyes some room to look off into that faraway point. It gives the image a little more room to breathe. So let's try an image like that where we turn the orientation of the camera. All right, so what you see there is the gaze of the subject has some room to be. It's a little more interesting. That was a really great image. But let's also think about how the rule of thirds applies to an image, that the image we just took. It's really interesting how you might notice in that image, the subject is to the right third of the image, and then the gaze looks off to the left, and the gaze has the 2/3 of that image to be, to live, which makes a more artistically and interesting looking portrait. So in those landscape orientations, sometimes we're going to look at where we place our subject to how to positively affect the resulting image. Maybe it's a matter of, let's put that subject in one of those crossbars of the rules of thirds to allow a little more interesting orientation of the image.
Yeah, so as we grow as photographers and we learn some of these tricks and tips, really when the vision that you have for an image, when you know how to execute that with the tool you have, whether it's a cell phone or a DSLR or whatever you're using, when those two things converge, then you're really growing, you know, in your craft. And so, yeah, just take note of these tips and tricks and add them to your tool bag. Any other thoughts?
I like how it added a little mood and using that asymmetry, like just putting her off center just a little bit. And I think Steve mentioned it before, where I don't know when the word vertical and horizontal changed to portrait and landscape. You know, it confuses us old timers a little bit, but it definitely adds to the portrait that you can have a horizontal portrait, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I think the other point is that you're turning her face to the light. And that's probably why you guys see on some of the reviews, if any of you are photographers, we gripe about when you're looking the wrong way, away from the main light. The eyes should follow the nose towards the light, because that's the intent. That's where all of that mood is coming from. And you never want the eyes going across the other way. It would almost look strange if she looked left, but the window's to her right. And that's, you know, that's some of the things that we, you know, equate back to our own photography. So, you know, just a little tidbit on my perspective of it. But again, I love the creativity there. That's very cool.
Mhm.
All right. So I'm jumping in next here, Joey, right? We got outside, changing your perspective. So using texture and diagonal leading lines to add a little bit of interest to our portraits. So why don't we get into that video next, if there's not any questions or anything.
All right, guys. Oftentimes when we're out on the street, an old building with a really cool brick wall like this can make a great photo. I've got Aaron positioned up against this wall. We've got beautiful lighting. Let's go ahead and get a few pictures right here. I like, Aaron's got the fashion model thing going down pretty well here. I want to look though at how we can use this wall differently. This is really good. This is nice. We see this texture of the wall, but sometimes diagonal lines can create more interest in our photos. I'm going to have you turn toward me this way. And as I move the camera to the side now, the wall changes shape and I have these really cool diagonal lines. Diagonal lines look great in a photo. And this is a whole different look in the exact same location. I really like this. In fact, if I come in a little closer and just do a close-up shot, look what those lines in the background are doing now. This is great. You remember before, we used portrait mode to throw that background out of focus. What if I try that now? Because right now that wall is in focus all the way down. But if I jump into portrait mode and bring my focus onto Aaron, now that wall starts to fall out of focus in the background, and that is great. In fact, the closer that I get to my subject increases that look. Way to go. I love it.
Very cool. So I don't know if you guys notice, as he's photographing, those rule of thirds, that grid pops up in almost everyone's camera. I mean, it's almost always there. So you can use that for those asymmetrical images. Now, the tilt and that diagonal line, again, diagonal lines add movement. You can feel that movement in that image because of those lines. And then by creating that portrait mode look where that focus just falls off, you don't really need to see those lines all the way back, because we're interested in our subject, Miss Erin. Beautiful picture, beautiful pose. And really the star of that image is the lighting, that beautiful light that's reflecting off of some other building or a parking lot or something. It's filling in, and it was gorgeous. But again, those lines that I want to go back to, vertical lines, they convey strength. Horizontal lines, they convey calmness. Diagonal lines convey movement. So when you're talking about pictures, that's all we break everything down into, is shape and form, lines and angles, right? And it's that simple, but it can be so complex at the same time, depending on what we're trying to capture. So anyone else want to put anything in on this discussion?
Frank, I was going to say, you mentioned something there about that particular scene that I think applies so often when we're out in a situation like that. Is you mentioned the lighting, how beautiful the lighting was. That day was a very sunny day and a real nice blue sky with a little bit of clouds. What made the lighting so good in that particular spot was that we were in the shadow side of a building. And so you may find yourself in a downtown area, like Clayton mentioned that he did with his mom, and you want to get a picture in a certain spot. You may first initially see a spot that happens to be in bright sun. Don't try to take the picture there because you're not going to be happy with the results. Look for that same scene or a similar scene on the shady side of the street or on the shady side of a building, and you'll have much nicer lighting. Go ahead, Clayton.
So I've seen people who do sort of, I guess, street photography say that they've used like if there's a white wall on the other side of the street that the sun is bouncing off of,
Yeah.
that's a great lighting for if you're on the shadow side as like a reflect, like a bounce or something like that. And then it lights the subject really, and with a really diffused light. I don't know. I've heard that before.
Absolutely. I mean, think about it. When you're on the shadow side of a building or in the shadow of a tree, where is your light coming from? It's bouncing off of something. So if you have a lightly colored object to bounce it off of or a neutral color, then you're going to have a good color balance light. What if it was a bright blue wall and the sun was bouncing off of that? You'd have a blue light coming at your subject. You'd have to adjust for that. So yeah, I mean, if you just carry around a white building with you all the time, you're good, or you could get one of those white reflectors, that you can fold up like our spring reflectors, but you can pop that out and let the sun hit that right white reflector and bounce back at your subject. But what we're really talking about here more than outdoor street portrait photography is cell phone photography. So sometimes it's just a matter of take a second and look around and pick the best location.
Mm-hmm.
So
I agree, but it is fun to think that when you're walking around now, start paying attention to that sort of stuff.
yeah,
My husband gets a little over it with me sometimes when I always point out, I'm like, ooh, that's nice lighting, or that's a pretty area, or whatever the case may be, because I'm just kind of in that mode where I'm always looking for, a nice place to take a picture. So I suggest you do that as you're walking around. Pay attention to that stuff as you look at your magazines, as you watch your movies and shows. It's just really kind of fun what you start seeing when you start paying attention to that stuff. One of the things I saw in that last video that we're going to roll into is how the height of the camera actually can affect how the picture looks and how your subject looks. So let's watch this next video and discuss.
All right, so we have changed a little bit of the image again. So at this time, I'm on the other side of the couch. And what you're also going to notice is that we have closed down the big window that had that direct sunlight coming in, and we've opened up this other window that has nice and diffuse light coming in. So that way it's a little less directional, a little more soft. What I really want to focus on right now is the importance of the camera height and how that changes the image that you're going to take. Low camera angles tend to be more of an imposing and dramatic look, and sometimes not the best angle depending on what we're taking pictures of. It's normally best to take a picture at eye level because then it actually, the eye level of the subject, I should say, then it really evens out the proportions of the body. But then if we go just even a little bit higher, we can actually force a little bit of perspective to make the face and the eyes just look a little bit bigger and maybe even the bottom of the body a little smaller, which a lot of people like, including myself. So let's have Steve demonstrate that. Let's go ahead and take a picture right here, and then we can see what things are going to look like in these different camera angles. All right, so now what you may see in that video is that low camera angle, what you could have maybe noticed is my hand probably looked really big. Well, that's because it was closer to the lens than my face was. And because that happened, it looked larger. You know, things that are closer to the lens look larger. So as the camera went up, well, then my hand kind of fell a little farther back and my face came closer to the lens, which made it look a little more proportional. And then as the camera went even higher, we forced that perspective where the focus of the image really was the face and the eyes, and the rest of the body, which wasn't as important, fell off a little bit and actually became just a little bit smaller because they're farther away from the lens.
So there you go. That's a really good example of how camera height, lens height makes a difference in how your subject looks. This comes into play a lot in our interstate photography. Again, you probably hear in image inspection reports, make sure your camera's up high for this reason right here. I don't care to have my bottom half looking larger. No need for it. It's doing fine on its own. What I do want to look larger are my eyes and my smile on my face, you know? So as that camera comes up, you can see how it evens out the proportion of the body. And then when we go really high, it forces perspective and makes my face and my eyes look larger where the rest of my body looks smaller. One thing I always like to point out in this sort of a situation, look at my eyes going from left to right. Left side, my eyes look really small. The middle, they look pretty normal. And then the right side, they look really big. Well, I'm a big cheek smiler. I always have been. My cheeks go straight up into my eyes and they're gone. Plus, coupled with, I want people to see my smile, so I force my smile forward. So I just have no eyes whatsoever. A lot of people out there like that. Notice how that camera height helped me out. What else helps me out? If I tilt my chin down ever so slightly, my eyes open up. So guess what I do in my personal pictures when I take my selfies, or if I'm taking pictures with my family? Oh, you better believe you see me do this. I bet you even see me doing it in the videos. You see me prep for a picture and my chin goes down. So I'm opening my eyes bigger. So if you have a big smiler, try that. Guys, what else do you think?
Oh gosh, you nailed that, man. That, I mean, it showed it right in the video, and you just proved it right, on your camera. As you dropped your chin down, your eyes got bigger, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it opens it up, and that angle is so important. But it's so easy to do that angle with your phone, where you get this big DSLR in front of you and you automatically think, oh, I got to go lower and straight into the body. And no, the rules apply to both, right? It's the same tool, just a little different controls. And, the same rules apply for both.
I think it's interesting when you look at these three side by side, and you just sort of glance and ask yourself, what are your eyes drawn to in each one? And I think, in my opinion, the image on the far right, I'm immediately drawn into Erin's smile, because really it's made her smile and her eyes center stage. That's where your attention goes. So camera height is so important with how you make everything else look. Who was that? Michael? Hand up?
Yeah, I just think it's interesting also how the higher camera angle emphasizes those leading lines, which are literally pointing to her eyes.
Mm-hmm.
They
The
are.
back of the couch there. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah. Also, in the far left image, one of the first things that I see are the pictures in the background that are on the wall.
Mm-hmm.
So, by changing that camera angle, we cut those out. Less to look at means you focus more on the subject.
So true.
Well,
All right.
now that we've talked about how things that are closer to the lens look larger, we can move on to our next subject.
Yeah. Now we're going to talk a little bit about what Alyssa had asked about earlier, and the point Alyssa made about the different lenses on the camera. So if you look at your cell phone camera, mine has 2 lenses, but some nowadays have 3, 4, 5 lenses. And those lenses work in different ways, whether you have an iPhone or an Android. But here's the bottom line. If I had a zoom lens and I could zoom from, say, 24 millimeters to 105, that's kind of what you're doing by choosing those different lenses. On our cell phone, it's usually put in a different term. On mine, it's 0.5 or 1, and some have 2 or 3, and that's basically telephoto to wide angle. Which one do you choose in a given instance? Most of us often think about just how much of the picture do I need to fit in. So I have this background, I need to fit it in the picture. I'm going to choose the wide angle lens, right? But what we may forget to realize is that the choice of which lens we use impacts how the person actually looks. So here we have an illustration, Frank in the studio with Aaron, and let's play this video and then we'll talk about it again.
So we'd like to demonstrate how the different lenses on an iPhone will affect the image of your subjects. So we have 3 lenses, a wide, a normal, and a telephoto. So what we've done is we've put a couple little pieces of paper on here to create a mask similar to what we have in our cameras for school portraits. And we're going to keep Aaron's head the same size in all of our pictures, but I'm going to move closer and farther away just to demonstrate the effect it has on her. So I'm going to come in really close with my wide angle, and I have to get really close, and we're going to get her top of her head on that one piece of paper, chin there, and I'm going to take that image. Now I'm going to go to the 1, I'm going to back out just a little farther, and I'm going to take the next image. And now I'm going to switch to the 2, and I'll back out a little farther, and we'll take the next image. All right, so that's our example of different focal lengths on our image.
All right, so here we have a pretty clear example of how the camera height was actually the same on all of them, and our head size is the same, but the difference is we went from a wide angle lens to a normal lens to a telephoto lens. And what we want to look at here is, look what it did to the face. The wide angle lens, since you're physically so much closer to the subject, you're actually changing the shape of the face. You know, for example, look at the difference in how Erin's nose looks on those. Look at her jawline, and the fact that on the image on the left, we can't see Erin's ears hardly at all, but then we see her ears better on the other images. You know, you might think, well, how in the world does the lens do that? And it's really all about, there's optical elements in terms of the physics of light in the lens, but part of it is the closer you are to your subject, you're distorting the face. And, you know, for example, if I'm 2 inches from your nose, I can't even see your ears, right? But if I'm 20 feet away from your nose, I can see both ears just about as well as I can see your nose. So it has a lot to do with the camera position and the optics of those lenses. Wide angle is not always the best for making your subject look good. And the other thing, if we were doing a full-length standing image, sometimes people use that wide angle lens for group photos. And I've noticed on mine, we've done some family groups with an iPhone. And if you have, say, 10 people in a group, the people on the edges, on the right edge and the left edge, their face is actually going to be oblong, sort of like egg-shaped, going in the wrong way, and their body may actually be curved. That's the distortion from the wide angle lens. So use the wide angle lens, in my opinion, for landscape, scenery, pictures, inanimate objects. But when you're photographing people, stay to the normal to telephoto range to make your subjects look best. Anybody have anything to add?
I absolutely agree with that. We see that sometimes with our group pictures here at Interstate Studios. If a photographer is utilizing the lens at the widest point, which means that they're as close as they can be to that group, that's exactly what you'll see. You'll see distortion. The horizontal lines in the picture will actually look bowed because of the distortion in the camera. The people on the edges tend to look like they're stretched out in weird ways. So you got to use those telephoto, or I'm sorry, those wide angle lenses, appropriately and whenever that makes sense. And you could use them for people. You just have to step back a lot. You just don't want a human body close to the lens when using a wide angle lens, because it will start doing exactly what you see on the left side of the screen there, which I'm not a big fan of. There's so many good pictures. I'm so excited.
I just had a thought from something that I saw one time when they were testing lens distortion, and you could check this out with your iPhone if you'd like. Find like a brick wall that has a pattern, horizontal and vertical pattern, like bricks, for example, and put your lens on wide angle and get close to the wall. Hold the camera completely perpendicular to the wall and take a picture of that brick pattern. And what you'll notice is toward the top and the bottom, the bricks will start to curve out, and they'll curve out on the sides, and that's the lens distortion. And it's physics of the lens optics that's doing that.
Yeah, and there's such a thing at that middle image is considered normal, right? Well, what's normal? Normal is kind of how our eyes would see it, minus the peripheral vision. So you subtract the peripheral vision from us and you just go, oh, it's that, and that's normal, right? Well, as you go from wide, distortion, stretching to normal to telephoto's compressing everything and squishing it in. And it actually creates a little bit more of a slimming look depending on how far back you are, right? But there's a point where, okay, I'm taking a picture with my telephoto and I'm across the room or halfway across the football field and they don't hear you anyway, right? So it's the balance. It's the give and take, like everything in life, the give and take of exposure, the give and take of your lenses, and the give and take of distance from your subject. And that's always what we're juggling. We're just, we got all these things rolling through our mind of what we need to do. There's more than one right answer. Like we said earlier, there's always going to be a better answer or a different answer. We could all take pictures of the same thing, just like I did with Aaron here, and come up with different images from all of us just by slight variations. So great
Frank,
stuff, though.
Let me add one more thing real quick, because I just remembered this. You remember how earlier we said a wide angle lens makes things in the background look smaller? Here's a perfect example. The wide angle lens photo here, the background, we're shooting off the background because we're using that wide angle lens. In other words, the background didn't get smaller, but it looks smaller in the picture. So that's something you can use to your advantage if you want to hide something in the background. Use a more of a telephoto view where you can narrow down the view of the background. So good stuff. All right, so we're going to jump to Joey next, who's going to talk about a couple of special tricks inside the camera.
Yeah, so if you're photographing something that might be difficult to catch when you're taking a still image, and this came up in our last session, I think it was fireworks were the example. Sometimes you can take video and then take a screenshot of the video, or some of the cameras even have, while you're recording video, you can hit a button and take a still shot while you're recording video. So this next video is going to go through that just a little bit.
Sometimes we don't even have to take a photo. What you could do is take video of your subject posing and then go back and look at the video and find a particular moment you really like and screenshot it. Now, that being said, that will greatly reduce the quality of your image. It won't necessarily be an image you want to print, but if you're going to be using images for social media, for computer use, or just to put on your phone, it'll work great. So that's something else to consider. Some phones, however, even have a great little piece of technology where you can take video and take an image at the same time. So check your phone to see if it can do that, because that would be pretty handy.
So if you're planning on using that method of doing a screen capture, just be aware that I probably won't be able to make a print out of this or use it in a fashion where I need a high resolution image. It's going to kind of be limited by the resolution of your screen when you take that screen capture. But it is an option if you know you don't need a high resolution image. Any
Yeah,
thoughts
and
on that?
I think we were also talking earlier today about these cell phones now not only have, when you go to your video and you start playing your video, there's going to be a little white button right next that you can actually take a photograph while you're videoing. So you have that option as well. If you're videoing and you're sending someone through a flow of poses and you just see it, you can cha-cha. So you take a picture while you're videoing, which is kind of cool.
All right, I'm jumping in next here on how to take a pano picture. So there's a mode on your cameras for panoramic images, and let's say you don't have a wide enough lens on your camera, and we just spoke about wide angle lenses and what they do to the images, and these phones do something pretty amazing, and it's stitching together the image on the fly. So why don't we watch this next quick little clip here. If you're out on a quick walk and you want to take a landscape photo and your camera isn't quite wide enough to get the whole scene, there is another mode available, and it is called Pano. So with Pano mode, there's a couple different ways I can do this, but basically you're going to be photographing, and you don't need as wide of a lens to do this. So you're going to photograph by tapping the button and trying to keep the arrow on the yellow line. Now you can flip this to either side, so you can go left to right or right to left. I'm going to go left to right because I'm already set up over here. And tap, follow the arrow, come across, and stop where you'd like. Also do this the other way if you wish to do it to show more sky. So that's a couple techniques that you can use for Pano. Thanks. So good examples of the camera stitching together. That used to take so long to stitch those images together in Photoshop, and now zoop, you're doing it on the fly. And so the real power of this camera is it's stitching those images. And I did a terrible job on that first one. Like literally the line went way up. The arrow was completely off. I mean, I was just trying to pay attention to my wife and where she's standing so that she can capture me on video. But it took that complete flub and leveled it right out and just captured that little pond. And you know what? It's amazing. You don't need that wide angle lens if you don't choose to. You can use this panoramic mode. The vertical image is also something kind of cool that you could use for a cityscape. So if you're trying to capture these big, tall buildings and you have someone in front of you, but you want the building, do the same technique. You can just pano stitch upwards, right? And that's all I did was just turn the camera horizontally and followed that same line up. And guess what? It will work in a multitude of ways. But, you know, I know we were speaking a little bit about night mode and that little night feature that's automatic on a lot of the iPhones where it just kind of pops on. Essentially, and we discussed this after, and Steve mentioned this, that it's actually taking, when it takes those longer exposures in the darker light, it's actually taking multiple images and just piecing them together. If you move, it keeps it sharp because it has multiple shots to merge together. So it's using that technology in a multiple, you know, in multiple ways. But it's super cool to capture something like that that's just kind of out of the ordinary. And you know, landscapes, you can never really do justice to what God gives you, right? You go to the Grand Canyon, you pull out pano mode, but you're still staring at it in awe because you can't pull all of that in. We do the best we can with the tools we have. And, you know, I think I had both cameras when I went to the Grand Canyon, and neither one did it justice, right? But it was a memory, and that's what we all want, is those memories for our friends, for our families, and for other people to share with. And that's kind of the name of the game. So any questions or comments on pan pictures? That kind of concludes what we're covering today on cell phone. Oh, we got a taker. Okay, Michael.
I just noticed mine has a reverse called group selfie, which does it from the front facing camera, and you can pan it and it creates like a selfie version of a panorama.
Oh, cool.
How cool is that? And what phone do you have, Michael?
I have a Motorola One or something.
Yeah, all kinds of cool tools packed into these things. I mean, you know, how cool is that you can, because think about it, when you're in selfie mode, what usually happens, your arm's not long enough, you don't have the selfie stick, and you can't get everyone in, right? And that's really cool that it has that feature. I'm sure, you know, Google and Android and iPhone are going to rip that one from Motorola for sure.
I do have to correct you though, Michael. According to Ted Lasso, a group selfie is actually called an USSI.
Nice.
Yeah.
It's an USSI. Stop.
Well, oh, we got another. Kayla, question?
More of just like a statement on the like night mode on like iPhones. I know something that's really cool is if you put your iPhone on a tripod with like the night mode, normally it only goes up to like a 10-second exposure, but if you put it on like a tripod or something, it goes up to 30, and you can actually get decent pictures of like the night sky outside using that as well.
Yeah, with that tripod, it's amazing. You keep everything still and lock everything down. Yeah,
Some of the things
yeah.
it can capture in the dark
Yeah.
at that high of an exposure is actually pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, it's doing a lot. I mean, it obviously is bumping up the ISO, and it's widening out the aperture to let in more light. But you know, you can do it with your DSLR. You can set it to bulb, and that bulb feature is usually a nuisance for everyone. But I've taken pictures on a tripod on bulb for 4 hours outside at night, and you capture streaking stars, and you can get all kinds of cool movement and effects. If it's sitting still and the camera's still, it should stay still. But if something's moving along with it, it'll streak and do some really cool effects that, you know, just fun stuff that you've never seen before. And you don't really know what it's going to turn out like until the exposure's done 30 seconds later or 3 hours later or 4 hours. You know, it's at your own creative discretion, right? But
might be a fun time to try out with kiddos having sparklers in their hands, have them write their name or something.
oh yeah, that involved for sure. Yeah, just keep it on the tripod and don't burn it.
Yes, absolutely, for sure.
Right. Anyone else? Any more comments or questions or anything? So we are going to be sending out a survey, and we'd love for you to fill out that survey and just let us know how we did and what we could change, what you'd like to see more of. But we really appreciate you guys all coming and listening and just partaking. So thank you all so much. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week, and we look forward to seeing you guys again soon. Thanks, everybody.